What's up? I'm B and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be reacting to a very interesting interview that I saw a few weeks ago, and I don't know how it got recommended to me, but it's an interview between Dave Hollis and Lewis Howes. Lewis Howes has a podcast called School of Greatness where he interviews different leaders in a bunch of different areas and spheres, and it's all kind of about personal development, growth, business insight, relationship insight. He has people from all different areas of expertise, but the overall kind of theme is becoming better. That's why it's called School of Greatness. And so this interview is from March 16th of 2020. And I learned some very interesting things in this interview from Dave. If you'll remember, Rachel Hollis did an interview on School of Greatness as well, and I've spoken about that one a little bit before because it's in her interview with Lewis Howes that she says she told Dave that, I'm improving and you're kind of standing still. So in a year from now, we're probably not going to be together if you don't step it up. Essentially, paraphrasing, but that's kind of the gist of what she said. And she was on his podcast in 2018. It was September of 2018. And then obviously we all remember that in June of 2020, Rachel and Dave announced they were getting divorced. So let me remind you again, this podcast interview with Dave and Lewis was from March 2020. They announced the divorce in June of 2020. So there's some interesting things. It is a very long interview, but I have sped up the audio to 1.25 speed. We're going to try and get through it without too much muck. But it's going to be a long one. I might need to refill my latte before we get done with this. So we'll just see how it goes. Side note, this is the Khalifa Farms caramel oat milk latte. So good.
So you were telling.
Side note. I don't quite know how I feel about Lewis Howes. I like him, and I think that he is a very positive presence, and he tries to uplift people, but I think he has an affinity for choosing somewhat sketchy guests and giving them a platform, right? Lewis isn't out here saying, I'm the expert in everything, so listen to me. He's platforming people who say they're experts. He's having these conversations and just engaging in, exploring different topics. And so I like him, but I don't love all of the guests that he has on all the time, as evidenced by him having Rachel and Dave. So.
A second ago that in your bio that I have here, it says Dave Hollis is the CEO of the Hollis Company, but you just told me that it's now COO.
That's right.
Now, why is that changing? And do you feel like you're getting demoted?
No. So it's an interesting thing. So I came out of an organization, out of a corporate environment, out of status and stuff from having had a long career on this entertainment industry side of things.
Well, the whole point of the career was like, how do I increase in the ladder? How do I grow on the ladder? How do I get a better status, a better title?
My identity for so long was attached to what was on my business card, who was on my business card, what it said to other people. My value a lot of times was just really about, here is this thing on this card.
This is who
Please
I am.
Affirm me as having enough, a worthiness, or whatever it might be. So as I decide I am going to now push away from a thing that makes sense to other people for this thing I know I need, which is to leave certainty for uncertainty, to leave convention for unconvention, I was triggered, like anybody might be, about what other people would think of me making this choice that made sense to me but not.
From leaving Disney to...
So if you'll remember, when Dave stepped down from Disney and joined the Hollis Company, he said that he would only do it if he were to be named as CEO. And at the time, Rachel obviously was the CEO. And so there's been a lot of contention about that, like a lot of people just being like, well, that's not fair, because it's not fair that he would make her step down as CEO of her own company. But I didn't know that shortly after that, within 2 years, he's no longer CEO, he's COO. And I do think that makes more sense because COO is like the Chief Operational Officer, I believe is what it stands for. And so it's kind of like a better fit. They're still high ranking, they're still an executive, but they focus more on day-to-day operations of the business. And I feel like that would be more so a strength of Dave's than Rachel's, just based on his business background. So to me, it makes sense, but I didn't know that they had made that change. So, you learn something new every day. I knew that when Dave joined as CEO, there was a struggle. And I think he'll talk about it more in this interview, but it obviously wasn't a great fit. And so I'm glad that they made that change. Although at this point, I guess it doesn't really matter because they're divorced. And I wonder what that's like for him to know that like Rachel Hollis is still out there using, I mean, it's her name. It was her name for almost 18 years, like Rachel Hollis, but it's just odd, I think, to know that somebody else has such a public presence and like a business under a last name that you gave them when you got married. I don't know. That's a weird thing to think about. I don't have time to go down the rabbit hole.
Working with Rachel.
That's right.
Your wife, Rachel.
That's right. And at the time, like we made this decision to leave before the thing that has the most success for her in her career came out, right?
Right.
So
The book.
Go Wash Your Face.
Before the book, you left.
We made this choice
Wow.
before that book came out. As much as she'd written previous books and worked for a decade and a half building a company, that book had not yet come out. I'd read the book, but it had not yet come out. And so my choice to go do this on the surface didn't make a lot of sense. And so one of the things that I, in having this conversation with her, needed was a title that would make me feel more comfortable through the lens of what they were thinking.
Right.
And so even though she was a very proud female founder, even though we serve a primarily female audience, even though she'd spent 15 years of time, blood, sweat, and all the things of entrepreneurship, she was willing, because of an acknowledgement of the tools that I might bring as an operator integrator to her being the visionary of this business.
Even though she put 15 years of blood, sweat, and tears into this company, she had to suck it up and let me be CEO because I was worried about what the boys at Disney would think. And, I get it. Like, we all have pride. We all have our ego, and most of us tend to worry about what other people might think of us. But just the fact that he's like, she worked so hard. She's a female founder. She built it from the ground up. So if I'm going to come there, I need to be CEO is just funny to me. Although I don't want to discredit the fact that she was able to build a company and spend so much time and energy and money into creating it and getting it off the ground because of Dave's funding, because Dave worked at Disney, and because Dave paid for their bills. He covered the expenses. So, I don't want to discredit Dave, but just the way he framed it there, that's funny.
To give me that title. And once we got into the work, and as time passed, and I realized how little a title actually meant, how few people were really actually watching, not because they're bad people, but because no one is actually watching. Nobody actually cares. There was this freedom in recognizing that titles truly mean very, very little, unless the signal that we're sending to our team, the signal that I'm sending to my daughter or sons, the signal that we're sending to our primarily female audience is something that's important. Or if you've spent 15 years of time building something, right? And so Rachel has always been the leader of the organization. And as much as I came in and I think served well as a partner to help unpack the how we do the things that we do when she defines the what, switching back into a COO role was something that truly is a recognition of the work that I've been doing and puts her back as a CEO of a company that she founded 15 years ago.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious, there's essentially, from the outside looking in, I know it's much deeper than this, but essentially it looks like one piece of content changed both of your lives and the business. Because Rachel was building something for a long time and it was growing at a nice pace, right? Every year it was increasing and building, and she was growing and impacting more people. But I remember when the book came out, it's like everything shot up. The following, the engagement, the audience, the opportunities, the deals, the money, everything. Now, you knew, you probably had belief that the business was going to be great with you coming in, but that one piece of content, if that didn't happen, that piece of content, where do you think the business would be today?
We'd still be successful.
Of course. Well, she was successful before.
I have so much confidence that we would have figured things out.
Of course.
But when you have the benefit of a single domino knocking down so many other dominoes, goodness gracious, then it became about the application of gas on fire.
Yeah, how do we amplify this?
How do we amplify this? How do we take it to another level faster? Are there other tools that we could supply that would supplement this thing that's working as well as it is? And if there's a thing in the 2 years now that we've been together in this partnership that, man, has been disruptive and destabilizing, but super effective, I think it's the speed with which we've been able to hear from the audience, man, it would be amazing if you could go deeper in this thing or extend the experience of this. And so taking the live event as a for example, it was previously a 2-day event into a 3-day event. It was previously a smaller arena to 10,000 person arenas. Taking something that was happening in that arena and bringing it to a platform like a documentary, where now you're broadening the ability for an audience around the world to see.
It's so interesting to me that this interview was only 2 years ago, because even though I'm not the biggest fan of Dave, obviously, hearing him speak and hearing kind of, I don't want to say the confidence that he has, but how he seems, he's presenting himself as being confident, competent, capable, and just his vibe, as cheesy as that sounds, his vibe is so much different in this than what we see now. Now I feel like whenever we see him, it feels forced and it feels frantic. And maybe all of this is phony, and what we're seeing now is a true representation of how Dave authentically is. But it's just so interesting to me to see the change that occurs so rapidly. And even in his appearance, I don't love to make a habit. I try to refrain from commenting on people's appearance because, what are people going to do about how they look? That's just not always a nice thing to do. And plus, I don't think that we have value based on how we look. I think we have value based on the content of our character. But just seeing how he looks now compared to how he looked in 2020, I'm just wondering if maybe he hit an age where he started kind of showing that he was getting older and it was just kind of like a naturally occurring thing, or if he appears to have aged so much in 2 years because of stress and because of that frantic energy and because of his issues with alcohol and just all the chaos that unfolded after the divorce. It kind of makes me sad to see him like this. This video was posted on March 16th of 2020, 2 years ago. Wow.
Something that previously was limited to just people who could afford it and make it inside the room. And so if that book hadn't happened, I think we would have still cobbled things together. Just would have taken longer
to get there.
Right? Yeah. It's part of like focusing on the one thing that will help you get further in your business. There is, for anyone's business, even for anyone's life, a single thing that acts as this biggest domino that if this thing were to come to pass, it unlocks everything else. It's a linchpin of sorts. And this book was a linchpin for the business that, man, asked the question, where do you pour the gas? We just start pouring gas everywhere.
It's been a wild ride for the last couple of years.
It has. What's crazy, too, about the ride, I mean, I do need to say this because I came out of a world where vulnerability and transparency were not necessarily something that I didn't see the strength. I saw it actually as a liability. Mm-hmm. And the first time I was handed Girl Wash Your Face, it was terrifying to me. I panicked because I saw for the first time in a draft that was just about to be turned in, 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, binder clip. I'm reading it. It is triggering.
It's telling stories about your life, stories about embarrassing my life, stuff.
Why are you sharing these things? We don't need to share these things. And I actively petitioned to have her not release the book. Like, I use the voice that you use when you are with a partner, someone you love or crave love from. I knew we should not release this book, and I tried to actively convince her to not release it. And a credit to her, she knew because of the 15.
Dave Hollis actively tried to prevent his wife from releasing a book that she wrote, the thing that launched them into massive success. Because let's be real, even if she had a company that was doing well, that was growing, that was slowly getting bigger and bigger, without Girl Wash Your Face, we're not sitting here having this conversation. Like, I'm not making this video right now. Girl Wash Your Face catapulted Rachel and kind of cemented her place in the personal development and self-growth industry for the time that she was positioned as a leader in that space. I don't think a lot of people really view her the same now. I think we've seen a lot of fallout, and so she is losing popularity slowly but surely. But without Girl Wash Your Face, Rachel wouldn't have done half of the stuff that she was able to do. Rachel would not have made a fraction of the money that she was able to make in the years following the release of that book. And Dave Hollis is sitting here being like, I tried to stop her from doing it. And plus, even if that book wasn't successful, if it meant something to your wife, why are you trying to convince her not to release it? Why are you trying to tear down her dream of releasing a book that, in her mind, like according to her, she wants to help people. She wants to be open and relatable and encourage women to follow their dreams. You know, that's the posture that she's taken in presenting the book. And so why would you, as her spouse, not want her to be allowed to do that? It's mean.
Years of time she'd been in community with this audience. No. These are the things that they're also going through. No. Struggle is universal, and my vulnerability here will allow me to connect with this audience in a way that might afford them a way through that struggle for seeing themselves in my stories.
Right.
And in the resisting, was not a believer until after, of course, the book comes out.
Right.
Word of mouth is what it is, 4 million copies later, and all of the letters that come in telling us, and me more than anything, that no, vulnerability is not a liability. Vulnerability is a superpower.
Yeah.
And her ability to trailblaze in that respect was part of how I've thought completely differently about almost every single aspect of our business and my stepping into something that is such a departure from managing expectations and making sure the optics look right. I mean, in my old job, I was the person convincing people at movie theaters that these movies are great, or after they came out, convincing the press that even if they flopped, that was exactly what we hoped they would do, right? And I was good. I was good at telling those stories. It was the thing.
A natural born con man. He said, even if it failed, I just got to go out there and convince them. That's exactly what we wanted. Doesn't that tell you something?
That I could do well. And in a world that we all live in with curated Facebook and Instagram feeds, the idea of this kind of vulnerability felt so threatening to everything that we built and created. And now I lean fully in. Before we came on camera, you said, what's off limits? There's literally nothing off limits because the things that I struggled with and the things that I struggle with, those are universal things. Yeah. And my willingness to now own the fact that I've struggled and how I've gotten through the struggle is a confirmation of my humanity, but is also the chance to connect with the audience.
Yeah. What do you think was the biggest area of growth for you in 2 years? Was it confidence within yourself, Dave the person? Was it confidence in the relationship? Was it as a father, as a business leader, health? Because I feel like you've tackled so many different things in your life. Some things have gone up, some things have probably gone down. What do you feel like it's been for you?
It's been all the things, which is, I mean, like, the crazy thing is, I thought the hard choice was leaving certainty for growth, leaving a job for the opportunity. And that was a hard choice, right? Like every single day
was a hard choice.
The repercussions of that choice, right? The decision to now having pushed away from a safe harbor, the choppy waters were the hard choice day after day.
Our boy Dave loves a good ocean or boat metaphor, even back then.
I definitely struggled with identity. I definitely struggled with imposter syndrome at times. I came out of this environment where there were so many things that worked well because of a really accomplished team, super strong intellectual property, the greatest leadership in the world. And when I got into this small business, that there were things that went wrong all the time, man, that was hard for me to process, that I couldn't have preempted them from happening, that I didn't have the leadership skill that I thought I previously was exerting at Disney to extinguish things quickly before they became bigger problems. And so it took some time, certainly, to get into a rhythm in the small business, but some of that started to bleed into my...
That's called a reality check, Dave. You worked at Disney. You got promoted like pretty much every year until you were an executive at a young age. Like, you step into something that's already built and you just got to keep the wheels spinning. You stepped into it without having to rise to any sort of occasion. Now you're joining a business that your wife created. You guys are solely responsible for it. It doesn't have those systems in place. It's not a well-oiled machine. Of course you struggled with it because you had to be proactive. You had to take responsibility and take ownership over what was happening every single day in that business because it was yours and Rachel's. It's your responsibility to keep it running.
Habits. Yeah. Right? So I had a pretty casual relationship, I'd like to say pretty casual relationship with drinking as a coping mechanism for most of my adult life.
What, coping for anxiety, stress,
overwhelm? Like, hey, it's the end of a long day. I'm going to just go ahead and smooth off the rough edges by having a drink or two. I have 4 kids. I've got a busy job. I'm trying to like maintain a great relationship with my wife. Life. I'm going to have a drink or two at the end of a day. And as this transition introduced identity crisis, working with my wife for the first time, small business ownership, scaling from 5 to 65 employees, there were things that as they stacked, just really now we're taking the rough edges of that long day and having me lean way too hard into alcohol. And so
this was a year ago.
This was a year and a half ago. And it was about a year ago where I got the edits back for the book. And so in the sea of all of this other disruption, I get these edits back and I felt like, oh, I've just bared my soul. I've gone so honest and transparent and vulnerable. And you sent me back all of these red lines, the criticism of my honesty.
This is for Dave's book, Get Out of Your Own Way.
The truth that I poured into these pages was a thing that tipped me over the edge. And I had way too much to drink for a handful of days in the aftermath of getting these edits that it prompted a very hard conversation.
Also, in terms of that, we've talked about this before, where Dave very much has in the past, I don't know if he still does, but like If people like me, I'm good. If people don't like me, I'm bad. If I get praise, I'm good. If I get criticism, I'm bad. And so I guarantee you, the people who sent back the edits for his book were not like, you're an idiot and this sucks. It's probably stuff about maybe being more concise in some areas, maybe expanding in others, maybe trying to rework some things, grammatical issues, stuff like that. So the fact that he got sent on a shame spiral for writing a book, sending it to an editor, and getting edits back is very much evidence of his sort of insecurity in who he is and his self-worth. And that makes me feel bad, but also you're sending your book to an editor to edit for you, so you cannot be surprised when they send you things back. They're not going to be like, no comment, no errors, this is the best book we've ever read. Send it to publishing right away. Let's hit the presses. Come on, you guys, we just got to keep moving. No, you're writing a book. You're going to get edits. That's how it works.
About whether or not I was going to choose to show up for my life in this new identity or not. And so I had to declare right there, all right, I will not have a drink for a year. I need to find something that I can substitute for my reaching for a drink when I feel triggered. And my substitute was running. I'd put on shoes, right? And running for me became this therapeutic outlet to process the things that were otherwise triggering my anxiety, that were making me feel the identity things, that were straining my marriage, whatever it might be. And they were allowing me to actually feel the pangs of discomfort that come when you are doing something outside your comfort zone. Like, I understood intellectually, I understood on like a basic thinking level that I had to leave something that was not as fulfilling because of it not really introducing growth in my life. But then when I got to a place where growth was being introduced on a regularity that triggered my insecurities, I muted it with alcohol in a way that eliminated the chance for growth, which is crazy. And
so now you had to feel the pain.
So I have to feel the pain, right? Because I was trying to mute the anxiety, but it's, you know, alcohol or any coping mechanism, they tend to not be local anesthetics. You can't just take care of the anxiety without also destroying the opportunity for growth. You can't just take care of the imposter syndrome without also interrupting the way that you might learn to become something bigger. And so, man, I had to really connect with, do I really want to be fulfilled? If I had to leave what I knew, if I had to leave what I knew for what I need, if I had to leave this thing that was so certain that it was not producing growth, then I have to be comfortable letting the uncertainty just roll right in like the wave. I have to be able to sit in it. I have to be able to, like Brendan might say, honor the struggle. Right? I have to like honor the fact that these struggles, the hard things, the insecurity, the stuff that I'm feeling is actually for me if I can actually sit in it and experience it.
It's not easy.
Not easy. But yeah, here's how easy it's not. I had to start running. I have run 1,000 miles in the last year. Wow. Since I stopped drinking, I have run a lot. Now, guess what? I am.
You look great.
Fit.
You're in great shape, man.
Strong, right? Like, I am. Move your body, change your mind is a thing that Rachel and I say all the time. And it is, man, been the capital T truth of truths. Because in pushing myself to do things physically that go beyond what I thought I was capable of, I have reframed in both what I could do physically, mentally, emotionally. I have reframed what I believe my capacity to be in any capacity, in any arena, right? And so running for me, I just ran a marathon. I'm training for an Ironman. I mean, I am going to continue to push myself beyond the limits of what I believe I can do as
1,000 miles in a year sounds like a lot. That's a lot of running. Of course he looks fit. I'm just thinking about like how much I walk every day, or like when I use the treadmill, how many miles I go, and I was just like, gotta step it up.
A positive coping mechanism for stress, so that when stresses come, I am reminded immediately, oh, I can handle this. Thank you very much. Bring it on.
Yeah. What's the greatest lesson running 1,000 miles has taught you in the last year?
Well, I mean, one of them for sure is that there is something in clarity. There is something in space and time for yourself, right? And as a person,
not being on your phone, not working, not doing something.
Yeah, my ability to get clear has afforded me more breakthroughs in this last year and a half than any other time in my life, because of life becoming more complicated. And you know, so many times I think you find yourself thinking if you could just get to all the things, if you could just show up for everyone on your team, if you could just spend time, and every once in a while we forget that if we are not first putting the oxygen mask on ourselves when it drops, we will not be able to care for the people that are around us. I cannot pour out of an empty pitcher for those who have a cup with their hand out. And so running for me and that clarity, the ability to get clear, has been one of the purest forms of self-care. So that's one. Two, I grew up having been told a story about what I could or couldn't do because of my height when it comes to running.
Oh, when it comes to running.
Right?
It's like Clydesdales,
yeah,
man.
Yeah, right, Clydesdale. And I was told...
This is what, 6'4", 6'5"?
6'4".
Yeah, yeah.
Just shorter than you. I mean, I spike my hair sometimes. I can get there, but...
I've got a long neck, so it's like,
all right,
that gets me there. You got taller shoulders.
All right. But I had just been told this story through the lens of someone else's worry of what running on a frame like mine might do to my neck, my hips, my back, my knees. Like, they had every reason why. And I just accepted what they were telling me as a truth of my experience, but it wasn't. I had not yet actually tested their fear as being true or not for me. And getting out and pushing myself to do things has actually not only shown that I'm a runner. I mean, I'm a tall runner, I'm a fast runner, I'm a far runner. It's allowed me, because of disproving their hypothesis, it's pushed me into asking which other stories that I believe come from uncredible sources, right? Are there other stories, other limiting beliefs that I've attached myself to that I need to examine the credibility of the source?
Like what stories? Like, I can never work with my wife, or I can never do this, or...
Well, I mean, there was a story that I've had to unpack in the last 2 years about what kind of value I have as a person who provides for my family or not, right? Like, I was the provider for our family as much as Rachel was scaling a business. My career in entertainment for those 20 years had me, I'm 8 years older than her. I was starting a little bit farther along because of just our age difference, but...
So you had more financial
I was the president of
stability.
distribution. I had a job that paid well. I was the head of household, providing for our family as the breadwinner. And then my wife has had a career that has taken off in a way that makes all of my career, the 20 years of my career, pale in comparison. Well, if you have identity that's connected to provision as a value that affirms you as being good, worthy enough, careful. Careful when it's gone, right? And so, like that story through the lens of traditional masculinity, or that story through the lens of the way my parents raised me in a household that was great, by the way, but that also signaled from family of origin, hey, dad does this, mom does this. And I had to ask, okay, those stories were amazing for my childhood. Do they still have application in my life in 2020? And the answer ends up being, I can respect and honor the people and stories in the time that they happened without actually having to take them as my own. There's nothing in disrespecting the fact that now we are doing things differently here. Thank you very much, but appreciate and honor the fact that it worked well then.
Yeah. So what has been the biggest challenge?
I don't think it needs to be that serious. Like, just the way he described it as if it was this profound thing. I don't know, I guess maybe it is for him. Maybe because he's like in an older generation than me. I'm not saying he's old, but in an older generation, maybe that's why it's different. But I don't think there's anything wrong with there being a house where, you know, in a heterosexual relationship, the man is the breadwinner and the woman stays home and she's a homemaker and she's with the kids and doing all that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it being reversed, or with both parents working, or parents working together. Like, you don't have to be like, great, thank you, appreciate it, loved it for my childhood, but we're going with something different. Like, you just make choices for your own life. I don't know. Maybe there was somebody in his family that was putting that pressure on him to be the breadwinner. Because I know that, like, a lot of, you know, men who subscribe to traits of traditional masculinity will think that they have to be the provider, but I don't know. I don't think you have to, like, put it in a way where you're defending your family of origin if that's what it was. You don't have to say, like, I'm not trying to put that down. My household was great, but we're just going with something different. Does that make sense? It seemed odd.
That you still have unresolved in your marriage since this kind of, I guess, shift where you had this, you said you had this big career for 20 years, and you said in 2 years she's kind of blown that out of the park, I guess. Is there anything that you have unresolved that you're like, still working through?
I mean, well, let's put it this way. Like, the last 2 years have singularly been the two best and hardest years of our marriage.
Because you guys are nonstop.
For sure been the best and hardest. And the change is, we went from being people who I would say were a little more codependent in the way that we were not really willing to push into hard conversations, that in us.
So he said the past 2 years, oh my God, y'all, it has been so windy the past few days. I am struggling. Anyway, he said the past 2 years were both the best and hardest years of their marriage. And I guess that can be true, but it's just interesting that he's saying this in March, and then in May, Rachel's going to tell him that their marriage is over. And then she posts in June that they'd been fighting for years to save their marriage. So it's just interesting how things are framed and put out when you don't know what's going to be coming out publicly just a few weeks later.
Together as much as we do, as often as we do, have had to fundamentally change our willingness to bring it up respectfully, but bring it up.
What are the 2 hardest conversations you've had in the last 2 years that you resisted having for the longest time?
Well, I mean, we have committed. I will say this: like, we have committed as accountability partners to truly holding each other accountable. And so there are times where our ambition needs to be, at least need to have a conversation about the trade-offs, right? Yeah. Hey, if we pursue all of these things, what are the potential trade-offs?
Yeah. I mean, we never see our kids. Right? We don't hang out.
Yeah, the way that I tend to talk about it, just because you can build a nuclear weapon, should you build a nuclear weapon? I mean, I want to have maximum impact, but I also want to be able to sit at a dinner table with my kids 20 years from now and have them raising a glass, toasting the fact that we were close. So, but
that's such a weird thing for him to say. The first time I heard this interview, I was like, that's so weird that 20 years from now, you want your kids to toast you for being so close with them. I could get if you said, like, 20 years from now, I want to be able to sit around the dinner table with all my kids and just reminisce on all the fun that we had growing up. And I want to maintain great relationships with my kids. I want us to be friends as they enter adulthood. I want to know that I fostered and facilitated good and healthy relationships with them so that they'll want to spend time with me and with each other as they get older because I love them so much. But to be like, I want them to raise a toast to how close we were. It's putting Dave as like the key focus as opposed to the impact that his actions have on his kids and how he influences the way that his relationship goes with his children. And I think now we're seeing some of that distance start to form. It's odd because Dave is obviously dating Heidi Powell, who has 4 kids of her own. And it seems like Dave is with them a lot more frequently than he's with his own kids, although I'm not sure if that's just kind of like a social media misrepresentation because Heidi Powell literally never stops posting, and so maybe she just posts about her own kids more, and like the focus is on her kids, Dave being there, Dave being around, and Dave's not posting as much. Maybe that's it, but it's just interesting to see how things are being presented on social media. Not necessarily saying that's the reality, but we can kind of only go based on what we see, the information that we are given.
We've actually, we've adopted a practice of not only having hard conversations, but if they're really hard, writing them down. Because we found that there was a hard time sometimes in us not taking some of our traditional roles. I tend to be more of a debater. She tends to shut down a bit more when we start getting into confrontation. Which, by the way, if you're a person who tends to be a stronger debater and you're partnered with somebody who tends to shut down, then you start to display a bully.
You look like a bully.
You look like a bully. It is the worst version of me, and that's like the thing I want the least.
And so, you want to win, you want to be right.
Yeah. I mean, like winning and being right and all of that, man, it goes so contrary to what I'm truly hoping for, which is a more exceptional relationship tomorrow than today. So we've had to get to a point of sometimes laying it on a piece of paper, being really, really clear. The hardest conversations that we've had to have tended to be the ones that require one or the other of us to put it in paper and send it.
What was the last thing you wrote down on paper? That you wrote down, or the last thing she wrote down?
The conversation that we had about me hanging on to how I led the teams at Disney not being applicable for the way I lead the team at the Hollis company was an amazing exchange.
So she wrote that down?
She wrote that to me, and by the way, like receiving it, it hurts my feelings. I am punctured in my soul.
This is my identity. I did this for 20 years.
Yes, but like
Dave has a knack for saying things in just a real funny way. They like stick in my head where he's like, it hurts my feelings. I don't know. I know that people criticize how he talks with like 2 spaces in between each word, but I feel like I do that sometimes too, so I can't criticize it too much. But man, it makes me laugh sometimes the way that his cadence changes and the emphasis he places on certain words. But also, I want to know, have you ever been recommended to do that as a problem-solving approach or as a way to avoid conflict or resolve conflict by writing a letter down to your spouse? Maybe it's different because they're not only married, but they're parents and they're working together at the same company. But I feel like you should be able to go to your partner and just say, hey, I have a serious conversation that I'd like to have with you when you are in a headspace to, talk to me and be open. Could we please sit down and talk about it? And then when they're ready and you guys can have that conversation, you do it. again, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems very odd to me that you would have to write down a letter to your partner to bring up a serious issue, such as how he's leading the team at the Hollis company.
Ooh,
She has been an entrepreneur for 15 years. I've been an entrepreneur for a year and a half, 2 years, right? I still do have, as much as it's harder sometimes for my ego to confess it, things to learn about this small business startup kind of space, because all of my experience for 20 plus years happened to be conglomerate environments.
Yeah.
And so I made the mistake of thinking that what worked in these old environments would work in this new one, and they are not directly transferable. They just aren't. And so her ability to send me that note, of course, my first reaction is defensiveness, emotion, shame, anger. But because I'm reading it, and our agreement is like, read it and process it and come back in an objective way to have a conversation about it that is less emotional, right? It's impossible
Still
to be
emotional.
unemotional, right?
Still.
Impossible to be unemotional, but less emotional.
Yeah.
And we've been able to have wildly more productive conversations because of that.
I guess that makes sense, although I just know that it would not work for me because I would be too concerned about getting all of the phrasing exactly right, and I just feel like I would never send the letter because it wouldn't express fully everything that I'm trying to say, because I just wouldn't feel like it had everything in there to make sure that it was presented in the way that I meant and that it was taken in the way that I meant. Because when you write something, you lose a lot of the tone, and sometimes you lose some of the intent, and people can take things the wrong way. Although that can also happen in verbal conversation, but I mean, it makes sense that you can read it, process it, and then go back when you're not as emotional. I just know that that would not work for me.
It doesn't mean that it's easy necessarily, but it's easier because now the frequency of us having hard conversations is such a normal thing.
Easier.
That it's
the
easier.
more you do it, it's going to become like
course.
second nature.
Of
You're not
course.
going to be scared and trembling for months thinking, how is my partner going to react?
Yeah.
Or how are they going to be hurt? Or is this going to be a thing that we have to go to therapy for? Or whatever it is. You just start doing it more and more. And you lean into that pain, and you really start to find relief once you do it more and more. And what's the thing that you wrote down last? You sent to her. You said nothing's off limits.
Nothing's off limits.
Lewis said, I'm calling you on it. You said nothing's off limits. Tell me what you told her.
Most of the conversations that we've been having that I am starting are really around where to create guardrails, as it were, for not overextending.
Not just saying yes to all the big opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. I definitely made some mistakes at the beginning of us jumping into this venture together. As the book had not yet come out, man, I had a scarcity mindset and said yes to
every speaking gig, every money opportunity.
Yeah. And saying yes to everything is good till it's not, because, man, we hit places where there was absolute fatigue, and you start asking some questions about, like, oh my goodness, is this really what we want out of all of this work? We've had to have some hard and interesting conversations about where the lines exist for sharing every single part of our life, because what works and what has been unbelievably productive in being a tool for people is us sharing everything.
Everything.
But at a certain
every
point,
morning in the books,
every
in the
morning in
content.
the books, right? And so
there's no privacy then.
There's no privacy, but there's also, like, there have to be some lines, and we've recognized, man, there have to be some lines. We threw a couples conference.
That's something that so many people have talked about. Like, they really just were constantly creating content, constantly putting themselves out there, constantly going on tours, speaking engagements, XYZ, all that stuff. And it's like, you don't need to share everything all the time. And even now, we know that they weren't, because they were hiding the fact that they were struggling to save their marriage. But the thing that's interesting for me is that he felt that that was such a serious conversation, it needed to get written down. The whole, like, maybe not saying yes to everything and making sure that what we say yes to is something that we're really passionate about. I guess I could see how that would be a heated thing, because Rachel was like, you know, once you get going, keep your foot on the gas and don't take it off until the car crashes, or whatever that phrase was that somebody told her. So I can see maybe how there would be a disagreement, but I also just feel like that's something you should be able to talk to your spouse about. You should be able to say, like, hey, let's have a chat about this, you know, let's set up a meeting, let's talk, because they do work together. And so go into a conference room and just be like, we're getting a lot of opportunities. Do we need to say yes to all of them, or can we be a little bit more picky and make sure that we are protecting the integrity of not only the company, the business, but your reputation and also your energy, because saying yes to everything is going to burn you out real quick, as we've seen.
And it was a wild success. and it was the hardest thing that we've ever done.
Because you're just like,
Because we were trying to a very broad spectrum of people, some that were in amazing marriages, and of the couples that were assembled, there were 5 in the pre-event survey that had already filed for divorce. Who came as like, this is the last ditch effort, right? And so like the weight on our shoulders to try and, you know, potentially be the thing that might help them reconcile a like marriage that is down a path of irreconcilable differences. That felt like something that was a little more than we could carry.
Trying to save marriages without any qualifications to do so. The Hollis story.
And it required us to be so vulnerable in a way that didn't feel like we were protecting some of what needs to be kept
sacred.
Yeah. Just
like, what are some of the things? Is that public information?
Oh, yeah, no.
Like, what were some of the things?
We were on stage. We were talking about our sex life. We were talking about the way that we fight and how we fight. I mean, like, all of it. There truly were no limits. And as much as I believe it, man, afforded the audience unbelievable breakthroughs, there was like a fetal position that we found ourselves in for days after the event because it felt like, we have crossed the line in things that are healthy for our relationship.
Kind of like a vulnerability hangover, probably.
Completely. Completely. So
What's the thing you shared that crossed the biggest line in your mind? For you, maybe not for Rachel, but for you, it was like, I wish we would have said that thing.
You know, it's tough because in retrospect, the feedback was so positive that I have a hard time disassociating it like being an okay thing to have some collateral damage to some of what we feel for the benefit of the audience getting great value, right? But I also appreciate that like this is a long game. We are running a marathon here.
I'm gonna just reveal it all right now in one moment.
Well, it's that, but it's also like if I feel shredded, if like I get emotionally fatigued in a way that doesn't afford me a chance to still show up for this audience 5 and 10 years from now, then helping those people in the short term came at the expense of helping all of the people in the long term. And so I don't even know that there was a single thing. Truly, it was kind of like the combination of everything. And in some of the environments that we're creating, you have people that are like not sure that they are ready for some of the work that you are trying to break through, and pulling somebody into a super vulnerable environment where you're saying it's time to get to work, but they've got their arms folded, but they aren't sure that they can really get as emotional as you need them to. That felt like a heavy lift as well.
Because you can't force someone to do the work if they're not fully willing. You need to be willing first. Mm-hmm. You can set the stage, you can be vulnerable, you can teach, you can share. But I've been to a lot of stuff in the past when I wasn't willing to do the work. I would only go so far. I would take the things I really liked and not dive into things that were scary to me.
Yeah. What's interesting is I will say like the biggest question that we get in our audience tends to be around the idea of, hey, I am already on a journey of growth. Yeah. I have in a partner someone who has not yet woken up.
How do you get them? It's kind of like you.
How do we get like, right? So
Rachel was on the growth.
She was on the growth and I was not, right? So I can speak from like actually having had the experience myself of being, what is this woman doing? What Kool-Aid is she drinking? Why does she continue to become a better version of herself? Well, I feel like I am stuck in descending into a lesser version of myself. Mm-hmm. And I was so skeptical of the tools that were working well for her that if she had tried to push them on me, if she had tried to like twist my arm into reaching for growth, forget it. I would have absolutely 100% rejected the serum. But because she left a trail of breadcrumbs that said, hey, I'm going to just go be me. I'm going to go be great. If you watch me continue to grow into this better version of myself and wonder what is it that's behind this ascent to my greater self, I'm happy to let you know, but you have to have the curiosity to ask the question. And so she just kept showing up for herself. She just kept putting herself into personal development conferences, reading books, getting up early to spend time first. She was doing the things. And I went through a long season of being resentful of her becoming better, which is terrible because the resent was not truly a reflection of me having any reaction to her. It was really an insecurity of if she were to continue to grow, might she outgrow me, right? It was this worry of maybe being left behind.
Resent in a marriage is one of the most destructive emotions that you can have. Once you truly start to resent somebody, it just clouds like every aspect of your relationship. And so this is obviously very telling. You know, we know that they are divorced. They got divorced very quick, or they announced the divorce very quickly after this. So none of us are surprised hearing this, but it's just like, man, you resented your wife for trying to grow, for trying to make herself better and more successful. Y'all know I am not the president of the Rachel Hollis fan club, but when I hear stuff like this, it does make me feel badly for her. She's a driven person. She is goal-oriented. She has a lot of things that she wants to achieve, and to know that she's trying to do those things, and because you can tell when somebody starts to resent you, you can tell. It's like your partner, your husband, the person who's supposed to be supporting you and lifting you up, is angry that you're doing those things, that you're taking steps to achieve your goal. That's not a fun place to be in.
And it really ended up coming to a head where we had to have a very, very hard conversation about the trajectory of our lives, right? She knew that growth is the single greatest commodity in her life, and that she is going to pursue it every single day, regardless of how uncomfortable it makes me.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I was stuck, and even at that, I wasn't stuck, I was descending truly.
Right.
Like, we were on a divergent path that, trajectory-wise, begged a question that she asked and pierced my soul with. A year from now, if we continue on this path, will we still go on dates? In 2 years, will we still be making out? In 3 years, will we still be married? And I already knew I knew the questions and I knew the answers, but until she said them out loud, it had not hit me yet. And I realized in real time, oh, we're on the path of irreconcilable differences.
Yeah.
We're actually walking down this path. So now, Dave, you get a choice. Do you want to imagine a future version of yourself that shares custody of your children, has a drinking problem, doesn't have an accountability partner, and isn't married to your best friend?
Wow.
Or do you want to do a little bit of work to find out what tools she's been using to see if maybe they have application in your life? And I did. And I started in therapy, sat in a personal development conference, started reading the books, started moving my body. And as much as I'd had a good life. I fell into a rut, and any of us can, I think, fall into a rut at any time and feel like, oh, it's all downhill from here. And I truly was telling myself a story that, like, oh, I had 40 good years.
I'm curious as to what the timing of that was, because earlier in the interview, we hear Dave say that he had a very casual relationship with alcohol, where it was like, in his mind, 1 to 2 drinks a night, take the edge off. That's kind of what it is. But then he got the notes back from the book, his edits back, and he went on like a little bit of a little bender, and then he was like, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. Back in 2018 was the first time I heard Rachel tell the story about how she told Dave, either, jump on this with me, or in a year from now, we're probably not going to be together. And at that time, she was saying it as if they were on the other side. Like, Dave had jumped on it, he had agreed, he was doing the thing, and so now everything was great because he stepped up and joined her on the journey. Dave is telling the story in 2020. The book, Get Out of Your Own Way, came out in 2020. And so I'm wondering the timing of all of this, because I can guarantee you back in like 2017 or 2016, presumably when this whole jump in or we're going to be done kind of thing was happening, I don't think he would have been writing that book. So he's referring back to 2017 saying like, oh, well, are you going to be this person with a drinking problem? But then later he looks back and says like, oh, I really had a casual relationship with alcohol until I got the edits back for my book. Are you following? Because I don't know if I'm even following how I'm trying to explain this, but does that make sense how I'm perceiving his telling of the story and the confusing timelines? Because he's saying that before he had a casual relationship with alcohol, then he got the edits back, then he went on the bender and he decided to quit drinking. But also there was a time when Rachel said you got to jump in or jump out, and he's like, oh, well, you're going to be an alcoholic for the rest of your life? So I don't know. I don't want to like nitpick on people's issues with alcohol and like timeline and stuff. I'm assuming it can be kind of a wave, recovery is not a straight line, but it's just interesting to me how that was presented. Anyway, I'll be done playing Detective B.
And now this is where it just turns, and that crossroads between 30 to 40, I just figured it's downhill, which is crazy. Like, I am just now at 45 writing the legacy of the rest of my life.
Yeah. You ever find it interesting that you were at a company for 20 years that was all about imagination, and yet you were lacking it in your own life at times?
Yeah. What's interesting is
He said, you're dull, Dave. You're boring. You got no imagination. Lewis. Maybe I've changed my mind on Lewis. Maybe he brings people on here that I don't like just so he can roast them. Because he will roast him. Not roast, but like rib him a little bit later. And it is not comfortable to watch.
What I'm like stunned by now, the clarity I have in looking back now at the end of my time at Disney. I had 7 years as the sales head of 17 while I was there. And those last like 3 years were truly, I was not feeling challenged or fulfilled because of how great my surroundings were, right? Credit to my team.
You were launching the biggest movie, Star Wars.
It was Marvel, Lucas, Pixar, Disney.
You were launching
all of the records. It was the greatest year in the history of cinema by a stretch, the second greatest year by a stretch. Like, it was everything.
And you were unfulfilled.
And I was unfulfilled because my team was so good, the leadership was so great, and the intellectual property, these films were the best. Yeah. And so because I was getting high marks without having to study for tests, it truly was just debilitating for me because of it feeling like an underutilization, no utilization of potential, right? It was playing into one of my greatest fears in life, that I wouldn't actually be asked to use the gifts I've been afforded. And so what I realize now with so much clarity is I was waiting for someone else to create the thing that would challenge me instead of taking the initiative and chasing the challenge myself.
That's what I was about to say. I'm like, you're waiting for somebody to ask you to use your talents? No, you go out, you offer them, you create the opportunity, you put yourself out there. And, you know, in a sense, I guess you're making yourself vulnerable because you're putting yourself out there and saying, hey, here's what I can do, you know, if you give me the opportunity. And it's a lot safer to just sit back and be like, oh, well, maybe they'll see that I'm good at this and they'll ask me to do something with it. That's a safer option. And so it doesn't surprise me that Dave, you know, lived in that safeness and that safety for a long time. But I'm glad that he just clarified, because I'm like, bro, people don't owe you anything. They're not obligated to try and suss out what you think your true talents are and to ask you to use them. You need to put your best foot forward. So I'm glad that he clarified.
And boy, if I had just decided to do that 3 or 4 years before I ended my time there, I wouldn't even have gotten into the pit. I wouldn't have gotten stuck. I wouldn't have found, because I was so in that place where the challenge didn't exist and growth wasn't happening, that I allowed myself to slowly, until I was in this self-inflicted ditch, wondering what the heck was going on and begging for a way to get out. My wife, of course, at the top of that ditch, shining a light like, here's the way. Here's the way. I'm not going to tell you to do it, but I'm going to show you that this is the way if you want to do it.
This is what I'm doing.
This is what I'm doing.
I'm already on the path.
Yeah.
You can come along with me, come beside me, you can go behind, in front, but this is the path I'm taking.
Yeah. I assigned so much value in my life. The biggest commodity of my entire life was certainty. If I could control the variables and minimize the risk and have a certain amount of money in accounts and have a title, build a house that has a fence that's high enough, then I will be happy. And what I didn't realize until I sat in the chair of a therapist's office, went to the personal development conference, was this crazy, strongest potentially tie of the entire universe, and that is that tie between growth and fulfillment. That if I wasn't in an environment where I was being challenged with the possibility of failure, so that I would fail, so that I would, in failing, learn something new, apply that learning, and become a better version of myself. If I wasn't in a place where I could fail, I would not grow. And in the absence of growth, you can't be fulfilled. And so I didn't understand it. I was like, well, then maybe I'm just broken. Maybe there's something just wrong with my wiring, that I can have these things that make other people happy, but they don't make me happy. No. There is just a universal tie. You need to be in a position where you can fail. Now, look, I
don't know about that. I think it kind of depends on your personality, in my opinion. I mean, I'm somebody who very much likes to, you know, get challenged, try new things. You know, I align with that, where it's like, I gotta feel like I'm continually moving forward, but that's just my personality. I don't expect anybody else to live like that. Some people can find great contentment in that sort of stability and just knowing like, hey, everything's good, everything's calm. Like, I don't have to keep pushing. I don't have to try new things. I don't have to put myself out there for failure, because this is stable and that's the way that I like it. They're like, some people do find value in that. They find the fulfillment in having stability. Everybody's different.
don't like failure. I'm not interested necessarily in failing, but I also now can see failure as the thing in the last 2 years that has fundamentally changed the way that I think about fulfillment in my life, because it exists now. Now,
because you never failed before.
I was
winning all the time.
I was winning. I was winning, and the thing is, I definitely at Disney had plenty of opportunities to fail in the beginning of my career, because I'd had this crazy great opportunity of 10 different jobs in 10 years. I was always in like this, holy cow, pushing against the friction of my discomfort and knowledge acquisition and asking dumb questions. That was amazing. It was when I wasn't in the position to still have questions that were left unanswered, when I didn't have to try as hard because of the leverage that Star Wars and Avengers movies afforded selling them to movie theaters, right? So in the absence of that, now, I had to get used to the fact that in this small business, in this decision to pursue this pursuit of failure, that careful what you wish for, it comes, right? We're having the most success, way more success than I could have ever expected. And what people probably don't appreciate is we have unbelievably more failure every single day than I have ever experienced in my life.
Like, what's the biggest failure in the last couple
Here's the thing, they're not big failures, right?
It's little stuff here and there.
It's little failures that stack on top of each other. It's, oh, we have a logistics partner that didn't ship journals to people. Oh, we made a mistake in putting something on sale that didn't work. Like, we just, I mean, in real time, this happened this week. We listened to the audience, and they said, you know what? We would love for you to have an event in London. oh, yes, we would love to have an event in London. So of the Rise events that are planned for 2020, one of the stops is going to be London. So we put the tickets on sale and we create the Facebook group, and there's so much enthusiasm and it's going to be amazing. We got a 5,000 person auditorium in London. This is going to be amazing.
We're going to sell out quick.
And in 2 months, we sold 386 tickets.
No.
386 tickets.
In 3 months?
So we had to make a decision as a business.
Did you cancel it?
Of course.
Wow.
Now here's the thing. It's hard. Oh, it's impossibly
You're
hard.
like, we crushed it in the
It
U.S.
is
We got this
impossibly
event.
hard to have to admit that the market is not yet ready for us to come.
Wow.
But man, we learned a lot in the failure to have understood how much more work it might take to actually be able to have an event of that size in that market. Now, guess what? We did everything we could to all of those 386 people, take care of them, not just refund, but give them free tickets to another event.
Wow.
Like, we're going to make sure that they're taken care of. But
that's cool.
We had to learn, this market is not yet ready. Okay, what else do we have to learn? Like, we're in real time experiencing with a retail partnership we have with Target and a manufacturer who helps make our journals in China, what happens when a virus shuts down a warehouse, right? We've had to, in real time, find alternative sourcing. But guess what? The blessing in this, we found a U.S. manufacturer who can actually make it at, like, very, very near the cost of what we were previously paying.
Ship it cheaper.
I mean, there are things that are coming out of the failures that end up being massive, massive gifts for where the business is going. One of the hardest one of the hardest conversations that we've had to have with the team on a pretty regular basis, sit them around a table, cast a vision for where the business is going 5 years from now, and then very honestly tell each of them, the business that we will have 5 years from now is so different, bigger, and reaches people in different ways than it does today, that not one of you sitting around the table will be sitting at the leadership table unless you fortify the skills that you have to actually have the competencies to be at that table. And that includes me, right? Because
that's such a weird way to frame it. We are going to be so much better 5 years from now. Not one of you is going to be at that leadership table unless you get it together. Just fire them then. Like, I don't know how that's motivational. I would just be like, okay, so you think I suck then? Great. Why wouldn't they frame it in a way to encourage their employees to continue growing with the company and in alignment with the vision that they have for their leadership? Wouldn't that be something that is a lot more positive because y'all are wanting to choose joy and focus on positivity? Why wouldn't you take that approach instead of telling them that not one of them is going to be at that leadership table unless they fortify their walls? Ew. If Dave Hollis told me to fortify my walls, I would call HR on him.
none of us have the kind of experience. We haven't processed the failures. We haven't learned enough about all of the ambitious things that we're planning for to actually sit there and do the work in the way that it will require. Yeah. And that, for some people, can be disheartening. Like, what? You don't want me at the table? No. I do want you at the table. I just don't want you to think that you're going to get a seat at the table unless you acknowledge that you're going to have to take one step every day into something that's uncomfortable for you, that is outside of the scope of what you currently understand, that is going to, in maybe making a mistake or 100 mistakes, give you the rich data from those mistakes to now make you smart enough to be at that table. Yeah. And that's, man, we're trying to model in real time, not having problems in any way leave a stain or indict you as not being good or worthy. It's like, nope, you, for having made a mistake, were trying something that we never had experience with. What did we learn? Apply those learnings and let's go.
Yeah. What has been the common theme that you've learned about women over the last 2 years and what holds them back from their greatness?
Women?
Because you guys predominantly work with women. Yeah. I'd probably say, 80% of the audience is at least women who come to the events, who read the books, who watch on social media, who listen to your podcasts. What are the 2 or 3 things that hold them back in general from them achieving fulfillment and their greatness? What it means to them?
Great question. So, I mean, one thing I will say that has been like a hard, and we've had to really walk the community through this conversation over and over and over. I never get this question. Rachel always gets this question. This question of what will this do to your kids? What will this do to our kids, right? People, in some ways, having a set of stories told to them about the inability for women to both be great moms and chase dreams. Yeah. Like it's, and so I've never, rarely ever had people ask questions, what will this do to your kids? Yeah. Now, my wife gets this question all the time. What, Rachel, will the pursuit of these dreams and the travel you do and the work that you do on stages and all of these things, what will this do to your kids? And I will argue, and I have offered to our audience every time they will listen, you're asking the question in the wrong tone of voice. What will this do to our kids, right? I have 3 sons. My 3 sons will never one time in their life question whether a woman can write 2 #1 New York Times bestselling books, fill an auditorium of 10,000 people, lead a group inside of a boardroom, or have a product line at Target. They know that from having watched what their mother does every single day.
Yeah.
And I have a daughter who turns 3 tomorrow. Congratulations, Noah. But she, hopefully, will never need to read a book called Girl Stop Apologizing, because she's never one time seen modeled a posture of needing to apologize for who she is, right? If there was a gift in Rachel's journey from who she was to who she is, it was sitting in an environment that afforded her the clarity that she was made this way, that she was given these gifts, that she wasn't, having given these gifts, given a responsibility to use these gifts. And so, you know, if anything, there are...
I think that is sad that there's that pressure on women to not necessarily reach for business-oriented goals because they might have kids, and it's like, well, are you there with them? I think that's a really old school way of thinking, but I know that it still exists for a lot of people. And so it kind of bugs me even more when that question comes from women of like, oh, well, what will this do to your kids? Shouldn't you want women to succeed? Shouldn't you be rooting for me? I mean, not me, but, you know, if I was Rachel getting that question, I'd be like, what?
Some limiting beliefs around the worry of what people might think or how it might, you know, say something about you against the backdrop of traditional gender norms. And those are stories that are true.
Although, we do know that Rachel, for a very long time, maybe this has changed, did not love doing the mom things, did not love being at the school plays or doing pickup and drop off. I mean, who really likes doing that? But she very much was like, I don't do those things because I don't want to. I have somebody else who does them for me. So in terms of that, I could see the question coming of you know, what will this do to your kids if they read this section in Girls Stop Apologizing, where you talk about how you don't like being a mom? I'm curious what that would do to her kids, because I feel like it would just make them feel like she saw them as an inconvenience, but who knows?
If you decide to believe them.
Yeah, I think the question should be, what will this do to your kids if you don't pursue your dreams?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you model them that you're going to play smaller than what you could be playing.
Yeah.
Or you're going to not take the risk.
Yeah.
That model scares me more than I had to be gone an extra couple weekends a year to go chase my dream.
Yeah.
And had to have you know, it's like there's a balance obviously for everything, but.
And by the way, like this is another one, but this is not exclusive to women, because man, as a man, I also have like struggled with the worry of what other people think. But the worry of other people weighing in with their opinions of you living or doing your life, I mean, it kind of ties back into that idea of what will this do to my kids, but helping people become free by helping them see that truly people are not thinking about you. I mean, like, have a gift. People are not thinking about you. There's a very
there might be a couple people gossiping behind your back for a few minutes, and then they move on to the next thing.
I mean, if someone, what I found, I mean, I got such a gift in leaving Disney, where for so long I didn't leave because of what it might mean to them for me to leave something that made sense to them.
So you didn't leave because of the opinions of what they
100%. I was worried about inside of a construct that all of us had agreed, these are the rules, this is what happens inside of, right? If I were to leave there, what would they say was a barrier for me taking action that could have helped me get unstuck faster? Just cuckoo now, because once I left, the gift was, they are not thinking about you. It is not an indictment on them as being bad people. It is a signal of their humanity. They, like anyone who's listening right now, are primarily concerned with themselves.
Their life, their family.
We're humans. It's just like it is. Now, there are some people, for sure, that are paying attention and focused on you, but so often, their focus is through the lens of their fear, not of your truth, but of their fear. And so you have to decide, are you going to let someone else's stories as informed by their fear dictate whether or not you have the life?
Depends. I mean, I think as a general rule, like for somebody who's not a public figure, just living in everyday life, that's probably true. Like people, in most cases, are not concerned about you. They're concerned about themselves and what they're doing as opposed to what you are doing. It's like you could give a speech in front of everybody at work and like mess up and then feel bad about it for the rest of the day. But for most people who saw it, if you like stumbled over your words or you said something incorrectly, maybe they'll notice it in the moment. They're not going to be going home thinking, oh my gosh, that person was such an idiot because it took them 2 minutes to pull up the PowerPoint and they didn't have it ready, right? We don't typically do that. Most people don't typically do that. But if you're a public figure and you're actively doing things that are harmful, it's a little bit different. If people have a reason to call you out, they will be focusing on what you're doing.
That you want. whether your kids have the life that you want, whether you, as you fall asleep at the end of night, can do so with a peace, knowing that there is a reconciliation between who you say you want to be and who you actually are showing up as. That like distance, that dissonance, that space that exists between who we say we are, or who we say we want to be, and who we actually are, that's pain, that's regret, that's shame. And so often that distance is created because of wanting to keep other people happy who normally aren't actually paying attention to us, but if they are, paying attention through the lens of fear.
So you jumped into this thing 2 years ago, not knowing how big it could be, and it exceeded your expectation from my understanding.
Yeah.
You knew it'd be great, but you didn't know how big it could be. What's the biggest fear going into the next 5 years since you have these talks with your team? What's your biggest fear and insecurity about the next 5 years?
Well, the biggest fear truly is I can look back in the last 1 year and realize there were so many things that I didn't even think were possible in a 12-month window that if that's the truth, then 5 years of time, holy cow. And the question, I mean, it comes back to kind of that more general, like, just because you can build the nuclear weapon, should you? Like, I know that we are on a mission for good. I know that the impact that we are having has generational ripples. I have so much confidence in it. And yet the practical, pragmatic person in me, because of what it means to have the gas pouring as effective as it has been in the accelerating of triggers, some of that pragmatic part of me of, oh my goodness, if we truly believe we're going where we say we're going 5 years from now, we have to start planting seeds today, right? We have to start doing things today. And that, because it requires a faith, like Rachel and I have this conversation. We have it with our senior leaders. It's binary. Do you believe that we're going to go here or not? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, here are the things we have to go do right now to chase it. If you don't believe it, please explain why you don't. But then we have to stop doing those things. And when we say we're going to go do these things, the answer is yes. But it doesn't mean that you got to go do it scared, right? You got to go do it, even though it triggers some of the insecurity or anxiety of like, what if we're not onto something in this new business venture? Because our plans aren't so much a linear idea. It's this exponential thing that starts branching into some spaces that we've never been. We're launching an app this year. Okay. We've never launched an app this year. I think the app is going to be a tremendous asset to the people who decide to use the app. But because of it being a thing that we don't have expertise in, I don't know. We have a run that's happening this year, half marathon, 5K. It is going to be the singular, most amazing thing to stand at the finish line watching people do 13 miles when they are right now coming off the couch and have never run 1 mile. But guess what? We've never done a run before, right? We're doing a tour with USO this year. Never done that. We're doing like every time Rachel.
Lots of plans that ultimately fell through because, again, in June, they announced they were getting divorced.
There's these words, I have an idea.
You brace yourself like,
usually, by the way, at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, uh-oh, okay. Like, at least I've now become a little bit better in listening to the full thought,
not just saying,
and not just because she's the what person, I'm the how person, right? She's the visionary, I am the operator, I'm the integrator, I'm the how person, right? So the what person and the how person are an awesome combination. Holy cow, superpowers come together. It's an Avengers kind of situation. But as the integrator, as the operator, I have definitely stepped on it in cutting her off before she's even breathed life into what the what is. And so letting her have her vision, right?
But if someone would have done that to Disney when he was building it, you wouldn't have what Disney is today.
Absolutely. So she's got ideas in 21 and 22 that she's already breathed out. And the thing is, I know that they will happen because I've been witness to what's happened in the last handful of years when she's had these ideas. Where I start to get, like my anxiety is in like the practical blocking and tackling of like knowledge acquisition to figure out how. So I have to push into new tables with new people who have more expertise in fields that we do not currently have expertise in so that I can become smarter, so that I know how to find the right people to get at our table to really reinforce the existing troop set that we have to go chase the dream.
What is the vision in 5 years if everything works out with what you guys have planned right now?
Total global domination.
Exactly.
Here's the thing. It depends on what part of the business, right? Like there are pieces inside the product, there are pieces inside of the live event, there's pieces inside of the digital education space. They all have a little bit of a different intent or mission, but
Man, I think that's got to be hard. Not only losing the person that you were married to for like 18 years and getting a divorce. Divorce is never fun. That's, it's not usually a joyous occasion for both parties. Maybe for one person more than the other. It's like, whew, glad to be out of that. But that doesn't take away from how tough it is to actually go through the divorce. But then when you also consider the fact that their marriage was tied in so closely with their business because they both work there and they have all of these plans for what's going to happen over the next 5 years, and then suddenly those things also now have to change. You can't accomplish those because of the divorce. You know, maybe I do understand why Dave looks so stressed out all the time, because that's a lot to process.
A blanket, it's how do we find ways to get tools into people's hands on a broader scale, like just at scale, right? And so if you can make it into the room, man, we're going to create the greatest live event experience, period. I'll put it up against anything. But if you can't get in the room, how can we offer you something that will get you close to feeling like you're in the room, still serve you in a way that helps you understand a little bit of where your blocks are, unlocks for you a trail of breadcrumbs for yourself to help you find a way out. You know, all of the different pieces of business, they'll come back to that central unifying idea of giving people the tools to change their life.
Yeah, I love it, man. It's amazing. And the book that you have, you're stepping into your own path right now. You've got this new book, Get Out of Your Own Way, A Skeptic's Guide to Growth and Fulfillment. Why did you decide to step out and be your own personal brand, in a sense, and write your own book when Rachel's been doing this and doing her thing and it's been successful? Why do you do it now?
Well, I was not someone who thought that they would wrte a book.
You got to change the bio in the back.
I do need to change the bio in the back. Dang it.
So I just saw that. I was like,
I know.
The CEO.
I know.
It's all good.
I saw.
First and foremost, the way that Lewis asked that, he's like, well, Rachel's already really successful and she's written her own book, so why would you feel the need to write one? And then he's going to tell him that he has to change the bio on the back.
You didn't think you were going to write a book?
I didn't think I was going to write a book, but I saw the power in her owning her struggle as a source of power, and in that affording people a chance to see themselves in her stories. And so I asked, hey, is there the possibility of someone who's been successful but ultimately got stuck to, in sharing stories, potentially have people see themselves in mine, and in giving practical advice on how I got out of my own way, give them a roadmap for staying out of theirs. And you know, the format of this is similar, frankly, to what Girl Wash Your Face ended up being written as. It's 20 lies that I once believed that kept me in my own way. But I wrote it through the lens of someone who is wired completely opposite of Rachel, right? She has been a believer of tools like this from the word go. And I've been skeptical of just like anything inside of development, anything inside of growth. I've just been a skeptic. I have always been more fixed mindset oriented than her having a growth. She was born with a growth mindset. She's just always run towards every single thing that you might find inside of the definition of growth mindset. And motivationally speaking, as much as I've had success, I am wired way more for external extrinsic motivation than she, with an internal furnace. She wakes up in the morning, her belly is glowing, she is ready to go chase the day, right? So if you're a person who can identify in any way with skepticism of tools, with having had a fixed mindset, with struggling with motivation in a way that's disconnected and different, respectfully, than my wife's writing, rad. I've got a great book for you. These stories are as much for women as they are men, for people who stay home and work as they are for CEOs in a boardroom. I talk through the lens of having developed a great big career, through the lenses of father of 4 kids, father at one point to 4 foster kids, our pursuit of an exceptional marriage. Like, all of it's in there, every story, even some of the letters that Rachel and I wrote back and forth to each other are included in the book, because in sharing honestly and vulnerably these things, that when I once read Girl Wash Your Face, made me want to have her not release it. In having come full circle to appreciating the value of vulnerability as a superpower.
Lewis is me right now, just like flipping through a book. Lewis. Me and Lewis on the same wavelength.
Power, it's all in it. All there.
I love it, man. Make sure you guys pick this up. Get Out of Your Own Way. I think it's going to really be powerful for you, so make sure you check this out right now. Pick it up. A couple questions left for you. This one's called The 3 Truths. So imagine it's your last day many years from now on this earth. You've achieved everything you can imagine. World domination is at your fingertips. All the impact, all the fulfillment, love, everything has happened. But everything you created's got to go with you. So all of your work, apps, books, it's gone. It goes with you to the next world. But you get to leave behind 3 things you know to be true about everything you've learned. 3 lessons that all of us would have to be remembered by you. What would you say are your 3 lessons for us, or your 3 truths?
The first one is that growth is the key to fulfillment. I've got this tattoo here on my forearm that says, a ship is safe in harbor, but that's not what ships were built for. I got it as a reminder to my kids that they need to push themselves into places that do not always feel comfortable, that are beyond things that they are familiar with for the benefit of growth. I got it as a reminder to my wife, or promise to my wife, that I will every day show up and push myself into a posture of growth by chasing the uncomfortable. And I got it as a reminder for myself that on the days I don't feel like it, on the days when I am struggling to believe that I am in a position to go do the work that is required on the choppy waters, that I was built for this.
That's good. Okay, so that's number one.
That's number one. Number two, I would leave people with the gift of freedom that comes in knowing that other people are not thinking about them.
Mm-hmm.
I know we talked about it, but so many of the things that we are held back by are associated to wanting to keep and please the masses of people who are not actually thinking about us, and being free from that, holy cow, would be the most incredible and amazing thing.
Yeah.
And then...
And also, what's so bad about people thinking about you? It means... You're getting attention.
Yeah.
They're,
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. And then the last one for me would be that you are worthy enough today as you are. That no matter what your business card says, what your bank account says, what your relationship status says, the family of origin that you come from, you are worthy and enough as you are. Thank you very much.
Ooh. Thank you very much. Dave, I got to acknowledge you, man, for the growth I've seen in you in the last couple of years. I think we met like 5 years ago when you were at Disney, briefly. And then to shoot some shotguns with you a couple of years ago in Wyoming, and to see you from being this even more skeptical to like your health has transformed, your intimacy, your ability to connect with people. It's amazing to watch the growth, man. So I acknowledge you for constantly doing the uncomfortable. And I see it all the time. Everything you post on Instagram, I see you being very uncomfortable, and it inspires me for one day when I'm a dad to be able to do that as well. So I acknowledge you for that, man. Final question for you. What's your definition of greatness?
My definition of greatness is better tomorrow. It is a simple concept, but I am in pursuit of a thing that does not have a finish line. I am interested in just becoming a better version of myself, a better father to my kids, a better husband to my wife, a better leader for my teams tomorrow than today. That is greatness.
Get out of your own way. Make sure you guys get the book right now. Dave Hollis, my man.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you too.
Good times, man.
All right, so as you saw, there were a lot of little points in there and just little things that came up that I wanted to address with y'all, and I did as the interview played. So at this point, I really don't have much to say because I've said it all already. However, I was thinking about like my 3 truths that I would leave behind, and so I wrote them down while they were closing out the segment. That way I can share them with you. The first one is sushi is always a good idea. Sushi for breakfast? Sure. Sushi at a gas station? Why not? At least it'll taste good going down. Sushi's always a good choice. Number 2, good jokes don't punch down. Self-explanatory. And the third one is appreciate your loved ones while you can. Life is short. It is unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen. So if you have somebody that means a lot to you, make sure you just let them know. Make sure you make them feel valued and you appreciate the time that you have with them while you have it. And that is it. So maybe it'll be kind of fun if you leave your 3 universal truths in the comment section down below. And if you have any other thoughts on the interview, Dave, anything that they brought up, feel free to put that in there as well. And while you're doing that, if you would consider liking this video or subscribing to my channel, that would be incredible. And if you have subscribed already, thank you so much. I am so appreciative of you, and I love being able to just sit here, hang out with you, and talk about whatever. Thank you so much for watching. Please be kind to people, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.